She laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not the kind that slips out when someone says something awkward and the room doesn't know how to respond. This was confident, comfortable. The laugh of someone who had done this before and expected zero consequences. My wife looked across the dinner table at her friends, smiled wide, and said, "I mean, let's be honest. I'm basically keeping us afloat." 6 people at that table. 6 people who turned for just a second to look at me. I picked up my glass. I took a slow sip of water, and I smiled. Not a forced smile, not the tight, brittle kind that means you're one comment away from saying something you'll regret. A real one, calm, settled, the kind of smile that comes when you've already made a decision and you're just waiting for the right moment to act on it. She didn't notice. She was already moving on to the next joke. That moment, that exact second, between her laugh and my smile, is where this story lives. Everything before it was a slow build. Everything after it was a controlled demolition. But right there, in that pause, something shifted in me. Quietly, permanently. I want to be clear about something before we go further. This is not a story about a man who snapped. There was no table flipping, no public scene, no shouting match in the parking lot afterward. I didn't send an angry text. I didn't call her out in front of everyone. I didn't even bring it up on the drive home. What I did was quieter than that, and because it was quiet, it landed harder. If you've ever been in a room where someone you love, someone who is supposed to be your partner, your equal, your safe place, used you as a punchline, then you already know the specific kind of pain I'm describing. It doesn't explode. It sinks. It settles somewhere deep and cold, and it sits there while you keep your face neutral and your voice even and your hands steady around your glass. That's a part no one talks about. Not the betrayal itself. The composure it takes to survive it in real time. I had been building that composure for a while. That night wasn't the first time. It was just the time that made me stop accepting it. So I smiled, and later that night, after she fell asleep, I picked up my phone and I sent one message, one. And that message changed everything. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened from the beginning, because to understand why that message mattered, you need to understand what it was responding to. Not just that dinner, not just that comment, the whole pattern, the slow erosion that most people on the outside never see. This is that story. We met at a work conference 8 years ago. She was sharp, confident in a way that didn't feel aggressive, just certain, like she always knew where she was going and had already decided you were either coming with her or you weren't. That quality attracted me immediately. I'd spent most of my 20s around people who drifted. She didn't drift. I was working in project management at the time. Stable income, steady upward track, nothing flashy. She was in pharmaceutical sales, which even at entry level paid better than my field. We both knew that going in. It was never a secret. It was never a problem. At least, not at first. We dated for 2 years before we got married. During that time, the money difference barely registered. We split things fairly. We talked openly about finances. She never made me feel small about what I earned. If anything, she respected that I was building something methodical and long-term, not chasing commission spikes, but climbing steadily. We got married on a Saturday in October. Small ceremony, 30 people. I remember thinking that day that I had chosen well, not just a woman I loved, but a partner who understood the difference between wealth and stability. For the first 3 years, that was true. Then her career accelerated. A promotion, then another. Then a regional director title that came with a salary that nearly doubled what she had been earning. I was proud of her, genuinely. I told her that. I showed up to her celebration dinner, I bought the champagne, I meant every word I said about how hard she'd worked for it. What I didn't see, what I was too close to notice, was that the promotion didn't just change her income, it changed how she saw the gap between us. It happened slowly. That's the part that makes it hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. It was gradual. A shifted tone here, a small comment there. The way she started describing my job to people at parties. accurate in the facts, but flat in the telling, like she was summarizing something unremarkable. I told myself it was stress, adjustment, the pressure that comes with a bigger role. I kept telling myself that longer than I should have. The first comment I remember clearly happened about 14 months before the dinner party. We were at her colleague's birthday gathering. Casual, backyard, maybe 20 people, nothing formal. Someone asked what I did for work. I answered, and before the conversation could move naturally forward, she added, "He's very comfortable with routine." Then she laughed softly and touched my arm like it was affectionate. The person asking smiled politely and changed the subject. I didn't say anything. I filed it away. 3 weeks later, her mother asked how work was going for both of us. She gave her own update first, enthusiastic, detailed, full of momentum. Then she summarized mine in one sentence. "He's doing his thing." Her mother nodded and redirected the conversation back to her daughter's career. Still, I said nothing. I told myself I was being sensitive, but I started paying attention. Over the next year, I counted, not obsessively, just honestly, 11 separate moments where she used my income or my career as a contrast point. Sometimes to make herself look more impressive, sometimes as a punchline, sometimes dressed up as a joke so that if I ever objected, I'd be the one who couldn't take humor. That last part was deliberate. I believe that now. Because the comments always came with a smile, always in company, always framed lightly enough that a direct response from me would have looked like overreaction. She had found a format that worked for her, one that delivered the humiliation with built-in protection against consequences. What it did to me internally was harder to track. It didn't make me angry, not immediately. It made me doubt. I'd find myself justifying my career choices on the drive home from events, quietly rehearsing achievements in my head, reminding myself of things I should have never needed reminding of. That's what sustained humiliation does. It doesn't break you loudly. It quietly moves into the space where your confidence used to live. I tried once to address it directly, a calm conversation, no accusations, just an honest statement that certain comments were landing harder than she probably intended. She apologized, said she didn't realize, said she'd be more mindful. 2 weeks later, she told a story at dinner that ended with the punchline being my salary. After that, I stopped bringing it up. Not because I accepted it, because I started thinking differently about how to respond. The dinner party was her idea, which matters. She planned it, selected the guest list, chose the restaurant, and spent the drive there telling me how important these particular friendships were to her professionally and socially. 2 of the women at the table were former colleagues who had moved into senior roles at competing firms. One was a close friend whose opinion she valued more than almost anyone else's. The others were partners and spouses, filling out the table. I understood the subtext without her stating it. This was a performance dinner. She wanted to look good. She wanted to feel impressive. I had been to enough of these to know my role. Be pleasant, be engaging, don't dominate, don't embarrass her. I had no intention of doing any of those things. We were 40 minutes into the meal when the conversation shifted to money, not in a crass way. It started as a discussion about the housing market, which moved into property investments, which moved into income trajectories and career pivots. Normal dinner table territory for people at a certain professional level. Someone asked how we were navigating the market as a couple. She answered before I could form a thought. Well, I handled most of the financial heavy lifting. She smiled as she said it. Easy, practiced. He's in project management, which is, steady, reliable. But I'm the one watching the portfolio. Polite laughter around the table. The kind that isn't really agreement, just social lubrication. I said nothing. I reached for my water. She continued. Honestly, I joke that I married someone comfortable. Not ambitious, just comfortable. She looked at me when she said it. Not with cruelty, with something almost worse. Casual certainty. Like this was an established fact between us, and she was simply reporting it to others. The woman across from her, the close friend, glanced at me quickly. Just a flicker, then away. That glance told me she understood exactly what had just happened. I set my glass down slowly, and I smiled. The same smile I described at the beginning. The one that wasn't anger, wasn't hurt, wasn't performance. It was clarity. Because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about the insult. I was thinking about what I already knew that she didn't.
I was thinking about the message I was going to send when I got home. We drove home mostly in silence. She filled it with small observations about the evening: who looked tired, what the food was like, whether her friend had seemed off.
Normal post-dinner decompression, the kind that assumed the night had been pleasant for everyone involved. I responded when it was natural to respond. I didn't perform happiness, but I didn't create distance either. I was somewhere else internally, running through what I had already decided before we left the restaurant parking lot. When we got home, she went through her usual routine, washed her face, checked her phone, talked briefly about plans for the following weekend. I listened. I said the right things. And when she fell asleep, I got up quietly, went to the kitchen, and sat down at the table with my phone. The message wasn't impulsive. That's the first thing I need you to understand. I had been thinking about my situation, our situation, for several months before that night. The dinner party didn't create my decision. It clarified it. It removed the last remaining doubt I had been carrying about whether I was reading things correctly or overreacting. After that table, I was certain. The message I sent was to my attorney, not a divorce filing, not a dramatic declaration, just 3 sentences telling him I was ready to move forward with the consultation we had scheduled and postponed twice already. I confirmed the appointment for the following Thursday. I told him to pull the financial documentation framework we had discussed. That was it. No threats, no announcements, no confrontation. What those 3 sentences set into motion was a quiet, methodical process that she would know nothing about for the next 11 days. I want to explain why I chose this over a direct conversation, because I know that's the question sitting in your mind right now. I had tried conversation, more than once. Each time the behavior paused briefly and then resumed. What I had learned over 14 months of small humiliations was that the dynamic between us had calcified into something she no longer questioned. She was not going to examine it willingly.
She needed to feel the weight of a consequence before she would take any of it seriously. So I stopped trying to explain, and I started building the consequence instead. Quietly, methodically, with the same steadiness she had always mistaken for lack of ambition. She woke up the next morning in a good mood. That detail still sits with me when I think back on it. Not because it was surprising. She had no reason to feel anything other than normal, but because of how completely unaware she was that the ground had already shifted beneath us. She made coffee. She asked if I wanted eggs. She mentioned that her friend had texted already, saying what a great night it was. She moved through the morning with the easy comfort of someone who believed everything in her life was exactly where she had placed it. I watched all of this and felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not satisfaction, something quieter than both. A kind of settled sadness that comes when you realize the distance between you and another person has grown so wide that they can no longer sense it. She was standing 10 feet away making breakfast, and had no idea she was already losing me. I had made my decision the night before, but that morning is when it became real to me emotionally. I ate breakfast. I thanked her for the eggs. I went to my office and closed the door, and sat for a long time without opening my laptop. What I was processing wasn't grief exactly. It was the recognition that I had been slowly grieving this marriage for over a year without naming it as grief. Every small comment, every dismissive summary of my work, every laugh at my expense. I had absorbed all of it and told myself it was manageable, that relationships go through phases, that she didn't fully understand the impact. But absorbing damage isn't the same as recovering from it. I understood that now. For the 11 days between the message and my attorney appointment, I maintained the surface of our normal life.
I was present at dinners. I responded to her texts during the day. I didn't create coldness or distance that would alert her to something changing. This wasn't manipulation. I want to be precise about that. I wasn't pretending to love her in order to deceive her. I was simply choosing not to have a conversation that I already knew from direct experience she was not yet prepared to take seriously. She needed to reach that readiness a different way. It was coming. She found out on a Tuesday, not from me, from her closest friend, the one who had been at the dinner table, the one who had caught that brief flicker of my expression when the comment landed and looked away quickly. What happened was this. My attorney's office had sent a preliminary document request to a shared financial institution we both used. It was routine, the kind of information gathering that happens early in any legal process. But the notification landed in a shared email account we had set up years ago for household finances, an account I had forgotten we both still accessed. She saw it before I knew she had. I was in a work call when she appeared in the doorway of my office. She didn't knock. She stood there holding her phone, and the expression on her face was one I had never seen before. Not anger yet, something that precedes anger. The look of someone whose mental model of their life has just been directly contradicted by evidence. "What is this?" she asked. I finished my sentence to my colleague, excused myself from the call, and closed my laptop. I looked at her and said, "Close the door." She closed it. She sat down across from me. I didn't explain immediately. I took a breath. I kept my voice level. "It's the beginning of a legal consultation process," I said. "I haven't filed anything. I wanted to understand my options before I made any decisions." The anger arrived then. She told me I had blindsided her.
That I had been walking around pretending everything was normal while going behind her back. That if I had a problem, I should have come to her directly. Her voice climbed steadily as she spoke, hitting notes I had never heard from her, a kind of panicked fury that was equal parts rage and fear. I let her finish. Then I said, "I did come to you directly. Twice." The behavior continued. She shifted immediately, told me those conversations were nothing like this, that there was a difference between a casual complaint and a legal process, that I was overreacting to jokes, that her friends found it funny, that I was too sensitive for my own good. There it was. Even in the moment of confrontation, facing real consequence, the instinct was still to reframe my pain is my flaw. That response told me everything I needed to know about whether conversation alone would ever have been enough. The attorney meeting happened on a Thursday morning. I had told her it was happening, not to be cruel, but because hiding it at that point would have been pointless and would have shifted the dynamic in a direction I didn't want. I wasn't trying to ambush her. I was trying to be honest about where I was, even if the honesty arrived later than it should have. She spent the days between Tuesday and Thursday cycling through responses. The first day was anger, sharp, sustained, and directed entirely at my process rather than her behavior. I had been secretive. I had been calculating. I had made a unilateral decision without giving her a fair chance to respond. The second day was softer. She came to find me in the evening and sat down and said she wanted to understand. She asked genuine questions, or questions that sounded genuine. What specifically had I felt? When did it start? Was there anything she could do? I answered honestly. I told her the pattern had been running for over a year. I named specific incidents: the backyard party, her mother's visit, the dinner.
I was calm and clear and specific. She listened. Then she said, "I think you're cataloging things in a very uncharitable way." The third day she called her close friend. I know this because the friend texted me directly that evening. A short message. It said, "She's reframing the whole thing to make herself the victim. I was at that dinner. I saw your face. I just want you to know I see it clearly." I didn't respond to that text, but I saved it. The attorney meeting lasted 90 minutes. What I learned was that my position was more stable than I had assumed. We had kept finances largely separate by habit more than intention, which worked significantly in my favor. The house was jointly owned, but the down payment had come from my savings. There were details that, handled carefully, meant I was not walking into this process from a position of weakness. That framing matters, because she had spent 14 months suggesting, in rooms full of people, that I was the financially dependent one, the lesser earner, the one being carried. The documentation told a different story. I left that meeting and sat in my car for 10 minutes. I wasn't celebrating. I was recalibrating, understanding that what had started as a quiet message was now a process with real shape and real momentum, and she was only now beginning to understand what that meant. 11:23 a.m. She asked for the conversation herself. Not a fight, not another cycle of anger and reframing. She texted me on a Saturday morning and asked if we could sit down together, just the two of us, and talk. No attorneys, no friends, no phones on the table. I agreed.
We sat in the living room, the same room where we had spent thousands of ordinary evenings. She looked different than she had during the Tuesday confrontation, less defended. There was something worn around her edges that I hadn't seen before, and I want to be honest that seeing it affected me. I didn't feel nothing. This was still someone I had built a life with.
She started by saying she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said she could see, looking back, that the comments had been more consistent than she had acknowledged, that what she had framed as humor had a pattern she hadn't examined. She used the word careless. Not malicious, she said, but careless. And she acknowledged that careless, repeated, in public, over time, becomes its own category of harm. That was more than she had offered in any previous conversation. I acknowledged it. I told her I heard her, and that the acknowledgement mattered. Then she asked the question that was really the center of everything. She asked, "Why didn't you just talk to me? Before the attorney, before all of this. Why didn't you come to me first?" I had thought about how to answer this for days. I said, "I did. And when I came to you, you told me I was too sensitive. You told me I was cataloging things uncharitably. You told me your friends thought it was funny. Every time I brought it forward, you handed it back to me as my problem to manage." She was quiet for a moment. "So the message wasn't about punishing me," I continued. "It was about finally being heard. Not by you, because I had tried that. By a process that you couldn't reframe or deflect." She looked at the floor. "I needed something with weight," I said, "because everything I said to you directly had no weight. You smiled through it the same way I smiled through your dinners." That landed. I could see it land. She didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was different, smaller. "I didn't know I was doing that," she said. "I think," I said carefully, "that's the most honest thing you've said to me in a year. We didn't save the marriage. I want to be straightforward about that, because stories like this one often end with a redemption that feels earned on paper, but dishonest in practice. A single honest conversation, no matter how real, doesn't rebuild 14 months of erosion."
She meant what she said in that living room. I believe that. But meaning something and having changed are two different things, and I had learned, slowly, at significant cost, not to confuse the two. We separated 4 months after the dinner party. The process was not ugly. We had both stepped back far enough from the emotional peak that we could navigate it with a degree of respect. The house was handled fairly. The finances, which she had assumed would favor her, turned out to be more balanced than she expected. There were no dramatic final scenes, no screaming, no lawyers' theatrics, just two people carefully undoing a life they had built together. Her close friend stayed in contact with me briefly after. She said something that stayed with me. She said she didn't think you'd ever actually move. That was it, distilled. The entire architecture of what had gone wrong between us lived in that sentence. She had read my steadiness as stasis, my patience as passivity, my silence as an absence of options. She had looked at the man across the table from her and calculated, incorrectly, that he had nowhere to go and nothing to leverage. The smile had confirmed it for her. What she hadn't understood was that the smile wasn't surrender. It was the face of someone who had already decided and was simply waiting for the right moment to act with full clarity rather than hot emotion. I think about what I lost. I think about it honestly. 8 years, a version of a future I had genuinely wanted, the specific comfort of a person who knows your history and your habits and your silences. That doesn't disappear cleanly just because the relationship needed to end. But I also think about what I kept. I kept my self-respect. I kept my financial stability. I kept the clarity that comes from having handled something painful without becoming someone I didn't recognize. And I kept this, the understanding that silence is not the same as weakness.
That composure is not the same as surrender. That the most powerful thing you can do when someone mistakes your steadiness for smallness is simply to let them keep thinking that, right up until the moment the consequences arrive. She mocked my salary in front of her friends. I smiled. And then I made one quiet move. That's all it took.